Call the meeting to order. Please rise for the flag pledge. Pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. I'm looking for approval of the agenda.
I'll make that motion. Second it.
Mike made the motion.
Louis second.
Louis seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And is approved. The minutes, did everyone get a chance to read through the minutes?
Make the motion to approve.
Harley made a motion to approve
Second.
and Lynn seconded it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passed. Petitions, docket PC 091522-01. We are here to listen to Carly. We have questions for you, so come on up. They're easy ones.
Good. Good evening, guys. So the only thing that I have is really the memo that I provided for you guys. I was given instruction by the MPCA to extend the 60 days to not hear it because an EAW is a very extensive process that could take years and lots of money to complete. And so if that would be mandatory, we should not move forward until we have that information provided for the board.
So we couldn't like hear the hearing and then just put that as a contingency of, a condition to it?
That is so much information. I mean, if you look back at
I know, I don't want to read that. That's why I want to do it before we get all that
Oh, yeah.
information and.
I mean, if you look at the previous ones we've seen, it was 1,200 pages. So it's a lot of information to collect and a lot of additional information for the planning commission and the county board to make a decision.
Can I ask why the timeline? Why did the county start before the MPCA, or how did that get crossed like that?
So they applied to the MPCA before they applied to us, but
Okay,
they applied here, and they can happen concurrently, but the MPCA did not move quick enough on their process because I was just waiting on them to get this process moving.
So when we get it, we'll have 1,200 pages possibly?
1,200 pages more than what we already
You
would.
probably wouldn't be on the board, the planning commission. I mean, they
By the
take
time
like
it
2
happens.
years to
Could you
complete.
give us the short version when it comes up then?
There's usually some sort of summary or main points within the staff report from the EAW, if it is required. Right now, the D&D Dairy is keeping their numbers below the mandatory limit. So, but because we are in a karst region, it can kind of make the EAW mandatory depending on location. So it probably won't require an EAW, but it could. So that's why we're pausing.
What are the numbers?
The numbers, okay, so they are at 976 animal units right now. Don't quote me on that. And they're gonna go up to 1,400.
So they're gonna go up to basically the county cap.
Basically, they're
Beyond.
going to be adding less than 500 more animal units than what they have now. So they're at the 970 some, they'll be at 1,470.
What's the county cap?
15.
Yeah.
Animal
15
units,
Animal units.
so number of livestock, so you're talking animal units?
Yes, I'm talking
versus
animal units.
Animals.
Yes. That's generally how I do numbers with it. I usually don't do head. 'Cause
How many
that's
chickens is it?
10,240.
that 10,000 would be like one animal unit
Yeah.
for chickens, maybe 10 animal units.
Now, is there any assurances that the MPCA will act on this in 60 days?
Yes, so they have started going through the process. This is kind of me asking those questions kind of made them kickstart their process because I know they're dealing with a lot of other issues right now, so they kind of put permits on hold. But me asking questions and telling them I have a timeline, I need you guys to do this, is having them start the process.
So what you're asking us is to vote on a delay for 60 more days?
Yep, so I'm,
60
Are we
more? or-
delaying
No,
60
we're
days or
just-
just we're forgiving the 60-day rule?
nope, so I sent out an extension to the applicants and they know all about it. But since it was noticed, it's a formality that you table it until the next meeting. I should have all the information I should need by the next meeting, either to go forward or to stop it in its tracks.
D&D understands this and they're
Yes,
working through this process.
yes. They are no strangers to this process.
I'm a little disappointed with the MPCA because this is not the first farm in the karst area. I mean, I travel southeastern Minnesota a lot. And again, this is just one of many applications, so they're not inventing anything here.
No, and once you
Other
get out
than
of
dragging their feet.
Winona County, I mean, they're in
Oh, they're all over.
Wabasha County, there's 3,000-4,000 cow, or 3,000
Olmsted
plus
County,
cow, Olmsted
Dodge.
County. And that's all karst region and
Oh, yeah.
somehow
They
do it.
don't have the rules that Winona County has in place, and they aren't, like Wabasha's not delegated, so they don't have a feedlot officer. So it's just, I think it's Mark Ernest running that county.
You mentioned the MPCA is busy doing other things. Do you know what fires they're putting out?
I think a lot of it is the investigation with the fish kill. And they have a lot of new staff as well. So they're training, I mean, our delegated, or my regional staff, he's been there for maybe a year and a half. So he's relatively new. And then the other person for this region is maybe 3 months. So, I mean, I think he's relying on a lot of help from other staff members. So I think that is a big part of it too.
Okay, anybody go?
Sure.
Patrick.
Where's this dairy located currently?
Right off 43, heading south to Rushford.
They're on the east side of the road.
What section are they in? Do you know?
13.
Okay.
There's a sign that says D&D Dairy when you drive.
Oh,
by.
okay. On 43?
Yep.
Okay,
It's-
okay. I've been by it. I'm
When you're
sure.
going, they're on top of the hill.
Okay. As you're going south to the left?
Yep, to the left.
Okay, okay.
It appears we have very limited options here, so I'll make the motion to table this until the next meeting.
Second.
Mike made the motion and I heard Jordan say first. Any other discussion on Carly's still up here? She's just waiting for more questions, but.
No problem.
All right, there's a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Opposed? The docket PC 091522-1 is tabled. Next, zoning ordinance discussion to consider language revisions towards a greater clarity in the Winona County zoning ordinance. Should we table this as well?
If you really want to. It shouldn't be too painful, hopefully. So. And the longer you put it off, the more likely you have to deal with somebody else up here than me. So,
Oh, okay.
yes, you've only got me for 2 more months for right now. So, if that. All right. So, proposed ordinance amendments. We're coming back to you on a couple of topics that I know we've had some preliminary discussions before. We've talked about some language things before, but there's 4 of them that we wanted to discuss with you today. And you should have received, I think there's 4 memo type things that we sent out, right? I can't remember. It's been, it was only yesterday. So the first one to touch on is probably what we're hoping is one of the easier ones to deal with: recreational cabins and seasonal dwellings. I know many of you were here back in 2019 where we had a petition where there was a question about whether or not what the petitioner was proposing was a recreational cabin or a seasonal dwelling. And in that process, we realized that it's really confusing in the ordinance how that's all laid out. And in fact, seasonal dwellings, there's a definition of it, but it's only referenced in one spot technically in our ordinance. And so the question is whether or not we wanted to keep those separate, find some kind of distinction between them. And what staff's proposing on that is essentially to get rid of seasonal dwellings. It's either a recreational cabin or it's a dwelling, and just kind of clean things up. So you'll notice from the memo, and I'm not going to go through all of the language here because you have it in front of you already. But the current relevant ordinances that relate to recreational cabins and seasonal dwellings. Recreational cabins are permitted principal uses in the agricultural resource conservation, and apparently I have a typo in here. Fix that one here. In the rural heritage districts, you have the definitions of recreational cabin, seasonal dwelling, and dwelling unit. The recreational cabin performance standards from Chapter 9, and then the SSTS information that essentially allows a wastewater holding tank for seasonal dwellings. It's a specific exception carved out there. And if I remember right, I think Lou, we were talking about that that's actually out of model ordinances most likely, which is probably why seasonal dwellings in our ordinance. So kind of where we're coming from with that is why not just consolidate them? So what the proposal is, there's a few pieces to it. The first is to remove the definition of seasonal dwelling and just leave recreational cabin. So we would strike the language from the 4.2 definitions regarding seasonal dwelling. Pretty simple and straightforward. Leave everything else as is. The next piece that we were looking at as far as confusion, because this came up with that 2019 petition that we were dealing with, is what do we mean by a maximum size for a cabin? Is that living space or is that actual structure? So the proposal here is to clarify that the cabin size is the structure footprint as opposed to the living space. And the proposal would be to simply add the word structure footprint into 9.6 paren 1 to do that, not change any of the parameters, just to clarify what it means.
So, to say a screened-in porch or a porch that's not part of the internal cabin, does that limit that?
Structure, it would be the structure footprint if it's in like an all season, if it's actual within the structure.
So is it?
It would include if you wanted to put a garage on it, that would be part of the structure footprint if it was an attached garage. So
That seems very limiting.
it's, yeah, and this is all up for discussion. This is what we're bringing to you as a proposal. So that's an
So
option.
we're already taking away the seasonal, we're going to just recreational, and then it looks like we're really trying to downsize size of recreational.
We're just trying to clarify what it means. And you can change that. If you think that it should be the living space should be 900 square feet, and then you can have garages and whatever else around it, porches, that kind of thing, we can change that too. This is what our understanding was of what the 900 was intended for. But if you have something different that you want to change it to, that's up to you. This is just a starting point.
900 feet with a garage on it, don't give you much room.
They have about
Back into the
12 by 10 limit.
It's a
My
cabin
house is.
designed
garage
for
is about
temporary
I got
usage.
tiny house.
I don't know why my computer
Yeah.
keeps doing that when I
That's
share
what
my
mine
screen.
is.
I could see 900 square feet living space maybe.
That's a decent,
If they
that's
wanted to
a
put a
2-bedroom,
Colorado,
2-bathroom
look like
apartment
Lansing's.
where
Yeah.
my apartment in Lewiston was 900 square feet and I had 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a large living room and a
In
kitchen.
Colorado, larger.
Yeah, that might be a little more.
It's a pretty good size structure when you're talking 900.
Maybe 500 feet
Mansion.
square foot
Living space.
living space for a cabin.
Unlike an apartment though, your cabin has to have your utilities, but you've got your water heaters and so on.
It
An apartment,
doesn't.
You might have,
Those are
central area.
excluded. You're not required to have those things for a cabin. You can, but
well, let's assume most people will have it. So let's go back to reality, you know?
Except space.
I would prefer to not limit people. I mean, you're gonna have a cabin
If somebody wants,
and I assume we're taxing it, right? Probably based on square footage.
I don't know how that works with a recreational cabin. We can find out.
Jordan,
Would it be easier to just combine the two terms and just add or
We,
and use it?
we don't have anything else that references a seasonal dwelling other than that one spot in the SSTS statute.
So it doesn't.
There
say
is no
specific
other.
sizes
yeah.
or anything for it?
Nope, there is nothing else in there for seasonal dwellings. It's either a dwelling or it's a cabin, and a cabin is intended to be temporary, not for permanent living, based on the definitions that you see in your materials.
So if in the past, if something was over the 900 square feet, would we just consider it a seasonal dwelling?
We would have considered it a dwelling, and it would have been, I think for tax purposes, they call it a seasonal dwelling. I think that there's a distinction there, but it's within our zoning ordinance, there was no distinction between a seasonal dwelling and a dwelling.
That'd be interesting to know, like Steve said, how are they taxed on that?
I can find out.
yeah, if somebody wants to put up $1 million shack, let's take it because we could use the tax revenue.
the comment I guess I would make is, at least in our family, it's kind of the family get together. So yeah, it might be, I mean, I would like almost a bigger size because even if it's just one big room, everyone brings their sleeping blankets and blow up mattresses and whatever. And, you know, the families all get together at wherever. Some of them sleep outside in the tent. And so I would guess I'd either hate to limit them or at least make it large enough for, you could have something like that.
I just have kind of a technical question. If you're gonna delete the only definition, you're gonna delete definitions too, right?
No,
No?
no, we're just we're
Is it gonna
deleting
be
the
blank?
the definition of seasonal dwelling. We're not deleting the word definitions.
But there's nothing there then. There's nothing left.
Recreational cabin is defined.
Oh, okay, got
Yep,
it, sorry.
there's a definition of a
Duh.
recreational cabin and there's a definition of a
Got it.
seasonal dwelling. Do we need the definition of a seasonal dwelling when it's not used anywhere else in this
Got it.
ordinance?
Thank you.
Yep, sorry.
Kind of a lonely little item.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did a lot of
They
reading
put
of
the
the
orphans
ordinance trying to
sleep.
find it.
Just a quick thing, I'm not at the mic, but the structure footprint came up in a discussion at one point because some of the garages proposed that were attached were bigger than the structures. And so the idea of it being a cozy cabin that's tucked into the area was kind of defeated by that. So that was just a shot. Well, then should it be part of the structure footprint? So that's why we put it up for discussion.
If I may, the purpose of this ordinance when we adopted it back in 2011 was to accommodate hunting shacks, generally no sewer, no septic, no water, structures that we wanted to be able to easily permit and keep track of without having to make a determination about whether it's a dwelling and minimum lot sizes and everything else. We wanted to be able to say, okay, these are things that we think we can easily permit without public hearings, without anything else. So the idea is that it was small, it was for a limited use and has limited services associated with it.
And that's why it's a permitted use as opposed to a conditional use, is because it's basically an administrative approval if you meet the criteria.
So Lou, if I could ask you a question, if the footprint size was increased, how would that affect how we approve these or not?
Well, I think the purpose of it to allow recreational cabins, I mean, the problem is that the bigger it gets, the more amenities that are able to be added to it, the more you're essentially creating a home. And that becomes really hard for us to manage administratively. I mean, at that point, it's like, well, you know, you could have a mansion, you know, that we use that as a cabin. That's our summer cabin. And we're sitting there going, well, that's a dwelling. and that needs to be permitted as such. I don't care if you use it, a couple of weekends in the summer, that looks like a home to me.
If you sell it, somebody else might use it.
Somebody else might use it year round. Exactly.
So, yeah, and
We don't really want to get into that.
right, so in the case of a dwelling, there's a lot more intensive process to approve it.
There's density requirements, there's lot sizes. I mean, you guys require a conditional use permit for anything less than 40 acres.
Right.
So
And these are allowed, at least based on the current ordinance, on 1 acre.
feedlot setbacks, which wouldn't apply to this, front coils, which wouldn't apply to these. So we wanted to be able to make things easy to build for recreation purposes and not have to group them into dwellings, which was.
How often are you dealing with it?
What's that?
How often are you dealing with this as a problem?
Regularly.
How many a year?
I
roughly?
couldn't tell you, probably a half dozen or so. And there's probably plenty out there that aren't permitted or are older, but most of the ones that we do are like, hunting shacks, and we're like, oh, great, it's recreational cabin, and we don't have to.
You're saying these are the ones you're permitting, not ones that someone's reported to you as a problem that someone's living in it year round. Is that
Right,
is
yeah,
that-
none of them are, I've run into any problems like that year round, as far as the recreational cabins that are less than 900 square feet. 2 feet.
But to me, if we're not running into a problem with it, it just seems like a added service that the county is, maybe luring more people in because you can have a recreational cabin.
Yeah.
I could see if it was ongoing and that you were having, people were building them and then trying to peddle them as a home. And I understand that's probably what you're trying to get ahead of.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's been working pretty well, and to be able to address some of those this way, and we haven't had any that have become problem, sites or anything like that.
Have you ever had folks say 900 isn't big enough?
I think it was just that question last couple years ago where it was, I don't remember if it's the height or the size. And, the question was whether we were going to require them to go through the CUP process, or it could be administrative.
That one?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, there's been a couple of questions, but.
Okay.
We're starting to turn off the lights, so when it gets dark on this side, we gotta leave.
The top one?
Yeah, good luck with that. I pressed it 5 times before it came on the first
Okay,
time.
we can still see.
That's okay.
Yeah, I'm all right with it being dark. You guys can still see me, right?
Oh, no.
Okay.
So are you looking for approval on these today?
Just discussion, if there's any consensus on things you want changed, if you like what we're proposing or not like it, that kind of thing, would probably be the way to go at this point. Yep, input.
Well, I agree to get rid of the seasonal and go all recreational because that is just a dead end.
Yep.
Okay. Reading through it, whether they have a holding tank or a full septic, not an issue with me. If you go up north to any lake, and they have their recreational lakefront, almost all of them now have a holding tank.
And on that topic, we're proposing a change in the fourth change that we were proposing is to remove that seasonal homes and insert recreational cabins instead, just to make it clear that that's what we're
Right, and I
talking
agree
about.
with that. But whether it's an on-site sewer, which we all know if you got to do that, it's probably 20 grand. And if you're just recreational and you're only in your little 900 square foot cabin, there isn't going to be too big a party there. So sometimes just easier, and like many of the recreational homes in Minnesota, they have no other option but a holding tank because they're close to a lake. So in Winona County, if the site is such that it's close to the Mississippi River or some stream, they have to make the decision, oh, well, I'm willing to do the holding tank. If it's truly recreational, now if you're gonna live in it year round, that's probably not a good option, or make sure your toilet's not running, or, it's got good hardware in there.
That gets us into part 2, the
Yeah.
living in it year round.
I like the fact that you mentioned under 180 days, I think.
Yep.
Because you have to define what's recreational
That's an increase from.
Yeah, so
20
that's
days.
it's actually
in 4 months.
depends on how you look at it. So this is one that the third potential change that we were discussing is to adjust the occupancy period to make it more enforceable and reasonable. If you read the original language, which is recreational cabins may not be occupied for more than 4 continuous months per calendar year, I can finagle that to where I can live in that cabin year round except for 2 days. It's so you could do that and still be within the rules. So the proposal would be to just have a set days of occupancy or something similar, something more concrete that's more easily enforceable.
Like going on repeatedly on the weekend, winter,
Right.
summer, whatever, it's up to you because it's your place type of thing.
Fall, even winter, I mean,
Yeah, you can go up for a month in the winter if you want. You can go for a month in the summer, however you want to do it. But it's a little easier than continuous because how do you prove continuous? If you're living there and you go stay at your mom's house for one night, is it continuous?
You don't know if they are taxed at all.
No, but
Yes,
I can
they
find
are.
out. Are they?
Yeah.
you bet they are.
Mhm.
I don't know how that compares to a dwelling.
Actually, there's a big complaint and beef up north of how they're getting taxed, even at a state level. See, our residents and everything but business is not taxed on a state rate for real estate. But I believe the recreational cabins up north are. So that's something that comes before the legislature. But it's still taxed county, township, city, whatever their jurisdiction is and whatever their school district is. And it's a different rate than your house.
I'd be interested in the different rates.
Yep.
If you could get us that
do that.
information.
We have 78 different rates in Minnesota for our property.
I can get a general idea of.
Thanks.
So coincidentally, just yesterday, I was door knocking for campaigning. I was in Minnetonka and they were looking across the river at Buffalo City. And they were commenting on how many more things you can do across the river in Buffalo City, all the boat docks and all the small cabins. And so, I mean, we do want to, I think we want to be competitive. We don't want to be prohibitive from, people wanting to come to Winona County and enjoy our beautiful county.
Carry on.
Okay. So any other thoughts on either the time period or actually I guess any of the changes? I'm assuming everybody's okay with getting rid of seasonal dwelling definitions. But either and probably with the SSTS stuff changed, but the structure, size, and the occupancy period. Any other discussion you want to have? Anything you want us to look into? Anything you want us
can
to put
decide on
changes?
structure size, right?
We didn't go anywhere with that. I was wondering too, if we put residential in there, would that exclude the possibility of having a garage or a porch? We call it maximum residential structure footprint.
The way we would do, I mean, there's a couple of different things we could do. We could, if you're concerned about decks, porches, things like that, we could specifically exclude those. We could, and I guess with the porch, if you're talking about an all-season porch, should that be excluded versus just
Open porches.
right? So how we could craft something that would exclude things that are basically an extension of living space, or we could make it so that things that are essentially a living space are included, but things that aren't are excluded.
So did you come up with, or maybe I wasn't listening close, so the 4 month or 6 month or however many months you're going to allow them, is that important? Can you find?
The 180 days is more enforceable than the 4 continuous months. It still wouldn't be easy to prove, but it's it's easier to prove than the 4 continuous months.
Which is how it is now.
Right.
Stephanie, did you take a look at different counties when you
Yes.
came up with?
And I did
this?
not find much on recreational cabin stuff, but is that the one I didn't get a chance to dig into? Might have been the other ones that I was looking at. I basically read other people's statutes for about 3 days. So they kind of run together.
I'm wondering if we were to make that 900 square feet living space and add an additional, like if we want to keep the garages not huge, put an additional limitation on, garage,
Height and size.
yeah.
Buildings.
I guess the question I have, and I don't know if you handle it, aren't garages permitted separately from this? I mean, don't you need a special permit to build a garage?
Yes, you need a permit to build a garage.
Right, so whether it's attached to this or not, you still need a
need
permit to
accessory
build a
to it, right?
garage.
So if you're in the ag district or any district, if you're building a garage, that's an accessory structure. So you need a primary use in order to build the garage. So you can't just build the garage in the ag district, let's say, by itself to store your boat in. There's got to be so if you have a residence, the primary use is the residence, and then you have accessory structures that are accessory to that. So garages and structures.
Okay, what happens then now in our township, I know for a fact, somebody from across the river bought a chunk of land and built a nice shed. It's an accessory structure. They don't live there, but they keep all of their hunting equipment in there.
We've gone round and round with people about this issue. Usually they're claiming that it's an ag structure. We have gone around and around with people on this issue before, and it's gotten to the point even where we had the assessors out there. The property owner was parking an antique tractor in the doorway, so you could see that there was an antique tractor there and see it's an ag use. And so we were having to. It doesn't happen often, but I won't say that there aren't a couple out there that are being used that way. And chances are that we may have gone around and around with them. And finally, we're just like, if you want to go to these links to lie about the use of your structure, we'll call it an ag structure.
As long as it's not hurting anybody else, right?
We just don't want them to be everywhere.
Right.
But so kind of back to where we started, I feel more like if we're limiting, you can only live there 6 months total, then let's let them make as nice of a place as they want to make with that we're going to get more taxes out of, because in the end, it still doesn't qualify as a dwelling. They can't live there year round. So it just seems like it just makes it more onerous for the planning department to, okay, we're going to say this size, living space, this size, porch, this size, screened-in porch, this size, garage. Just say either it's recreational or it's a permanent dwelling. And if it's recreational, then
That's what I get. I'd like to
if they
know.
want a nice one, then let them have a nice one.
With
Well,
recreational cabins, I got through one county's ordinance. I didn't get through the rest of them. But they do define a seasonal use, which says eating, sleeping, or general accommodation of persons for intermittent periods of time on a non-permanent basis. Seasonal accommodation is not a person's customary and usual place of residence or fixed permanent home, or the principal establishment to which the person, when absent, has full intention of returning. A seasonal use shall not exceed 56 days in any calendar year, January 1st through December 31st, or more than 28 days per camping season, whichever is less. For purposes of this definition, fall winter camping season is October 1st through March 31st, and spring summer camping season is April 1st through September 30th. So that's how Dodge County is handling
We
seasonal
gotta
use.
keep
We're getting rid of the word
Yeah.
seasonal, right?
Right, but that would be comparable to our, what we would say recreational cabin, but what they're defining as the time period for seasonal use is 56 days.
Do we have anybody
We put 180 as a starting point for discussion.
in the county that would keep track of that?
Yeah.
Just like everything else is going to be complaint based of, hey, this
Yeah,
person's living
yeah.
there. Or if we start, seeing a mailbox or like getting trash pickup, something like that, there we'll probably investigate.
I agree with Steve. There shouldn't be really a holding on it. And it all depends on the tax. I mean, is there a tax on it or is it just there? Yeah.
If it's.
Sounds like it's being taxed. It's just not going to
If
be
it's
taxed
real
at the
estate.
rate of
Well, maybe not a
a
tax.
dwelling.
rate.
And if we've got people living there to
Yeah.
avoid paying taxes as a dwelling, then the county's not getting the tax
Right.
base.
Right, and if we keep it open all the time, I'm thinking Airbnb. I mean, People
We,
might
we don't want to get into
capitalize.
short-term
You don't
rentals
want
We
yet.
don't
That's
at
coming down the
all.
pipe.
That's what I'm talking about. But if someone owns some really nice cabin and they want to make some money off of it and they can have people living there all year, I think we're getting away from what the design of the
He
whole
needs to say something.
policy is about.
Oh, Mr. Chair, Planning Commission members, I was just gonna say that, the only thing that's come up in the last 5.5 years is really height for the recreational cabins. I mean, not that you'd expect a 5,000 square foot sprawling rustic cabin to be fitting this definition either, obviously, but height did come up. So, that was probably the reason
Yeah,
why.
There wasn't a question about the 900 square feet before. It was the height of the structure that was an issue. If I remember it, that's how we came up with the living space discussion too, because for living space, if there's 2 stories, 'cause you could potentially,
Loft.
yeah, if you put a loft in, what's the definition? If you get into living space, you're talking about 2 different floors and adding them up, so.
So a CUP is not required for this?
Correct.
Okay,
This is an administrative.
Streamline it.
okay, so, I've heard that one of the issues is, what if somebody sells it to somebody and they plan to live there year round? That's an issue, right? How do we prevent that from happening?
Well, they should be able to sell it, but they can't.
But it's
Yeah,
only
so
permitted.
It doesn't make it anything but a recreational cabin. There's the next
It's
owner is
still-
still bound by how much you can live there.
Okay,
They would have to petition if they wanted to
Like,
convert it from
okay.
a seasonal cabin to a house, they'd have to go through the whole process, CUP process.
I was just gonna comment that I don't think 900 square foot is any magic number, because Mark said, like my family, I'm gonna use my brother who lives in Stone Lake, Wisconsin, and you might look up their ordinance. Has one on a lake, and when it came to his garage footprint had to be smaller than his seasonal building. So he couldn't build a big garage and put 18 boats in it and stuff like that. The bigger you build it, the more you're gonna go into your holding tank or your septic. So there would be some very big limitations, especially if you had 1 acre. Now, it doesn't have to be, that's the minimum size. But I'm against putting this 900 square feet footprint on. Because if you're,
Well, that's where it already
Freedom.
is. It already has that 900
yeah,
square feet
but I'm
limitation.
against that.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm like Steve, I'm for, hey, we have an opportunity. They're gonna be taxed higher than homes, at least the rest of the state is. And if they can creatively use that, and I'm gonna use my brothers as an example again. When we gather as a family, he's got his 5 grandkids there, his brother and sister-in-law and themselves. And I'm sorry, but 900 square feet, I'd have to be out in a tent, if I stayed there. Because Mikey has to have his little corner to behave himself, so to speak. But his is bigger than that.
Matt's probably.
Yeah, he might be there. And that, now we need even bigger than an acre for sure. But I think that's too limiting for creativity. But I do agree about the seasonal part going to recreational. Throwing out 180 days seems reasonable to me. How you quantify that, I'm not sure. But there's a lot going to come back and make these people design a structure suitable for the site.
Would it be helpful if we came back with more county comparison information about what sizes and what, if anybody else is restricting size, and if so, to what, as well as occupancy?
Yes.
Absolutely. I think you could get examples of Minnesota.
Yep.
I think that's shine the light.
The 4th day there was light.
The question feels a little leading in that bring back information on counties that have limited the size.
I
That
get,
assumes that this planning commission wants to limit the size.
What I will-
Maybe we want you to go out and look for ones that are bigger.
what I'm going to do is what I had previously done was I started pulling all the ordinances for all of the 13 Southeast Minnesota counties as well as Stearns and Blue Earth because they tend to
Just
be.
comparable,
Yes.
not looking for one thing.
No. I would bring you the information about what all of those counties are doing, who
that's-
has it, who doesn't, what they're saying. that
Biggest to
information.
smallest.
Correct.
and-
Yep.
like that.
I will bring back the information about what other counties are doing, not just what restrictions they have.
And you'll bring us tax information.
Correct.
I guess my thought, oh, go ahead.
Keep talking.
I guess my thought is well, let's put it on a hold until you find that out.
Yep.
Find out how they're taxed
Yep, we'll have
here
that for your
and
next meeting.
elsewhere.
Well, this is what we're doing. We're just
Yep.
discussing
Yeah,
here.
this
We're
is-
just
yeah,
trying to
Yep.
make things go the right direction.
Yeah.
You weren't
not
gonna
do
act on
anything.
this anyway today.
As much of the informal input that we have to try to keep honing it so go the direction that you guys want it to go.
Stephanie, you've
I want it as an
you've
opportunity.
received or looked at, secured the data, had a chance to talk to staff as it relates to this in those different counties?
Nope, we're just looking strictly at what
But
their,
it's
what
in,
their laws say they
Okay,
can and
okay,
can't do.
okay.
So, and I got through a good chunk of them as it related to some things, but I've got a
Brother used
few
to live in
more
Minnesota.
pieces to dig
Okay.
through them because
And just, you know,
ordinances are
thinking
different.
about this discussion here, is that maybe part of the next process from? your
Can we
end?
just have one discussion? I'm having a hard time hearing because there are too many going on at once.
Okay, Louis, speak.
One question sitting here, can this process, they put a cabin in, they turn around, come back, and they can end up with a full shack on the house or a dwelling?
Then they would need to come back for a
No, But I mean, if they
CUP.
come here, and I haven't seen very many permits we've ever turned down, that the people could be in a process to get into some of the spots that they would not normally be allowed to build such a dwelling.
Yes. Yeah, if they weren't gonna be allowed to do a dwelling, they could put up a recreational cabin as long as they complied with the occupancy requirements, which at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah,
are very
what I'm
difficult to
getting at is,
enforce.
once it's up, then in a year or two later, then they come back and they want the full
Yeah, then they want-
gist of it.
and then you can always say no if it doesn't fit the criteria.
But I haven't heard that from this committee
Right.
Yeah.
anyway, so I
It
mean,
is
it's
possible
just,
they could use it that way.
I'm
I'd
just
say
saying it's a
enact
backward.
the dimensional standards are still gonna be a factor.
Right.
That's what I'm getting at, it's a backward.
But before you give them a permit, they're gonna have to meet like all the slope regulations. You're not gonna give them a permit for a cabin on the bluff side, right?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Anything else on this one that you want us to look into before we come back?
Thank
Okay.
you.
When you explore their counties and their size requirements, you'll get the height too.
If they have it. Yep. Basically, I'm going to put together a summary of what the other counties were looking at, how they handle the recreational cabins and provide all that information.
You,
All right. Next topic is reapplication. And this is an issue that's also come up before. And the question is, if a petition gets denied, whether that's for a variance, a conditional use permit, interim use permit, even a map change or an ordinance, the zoning of a property, if those things are denied, can they turn right around and do the exact same thing and just keep reapplying until they annoy us into granting it? So currently, this is not addressed in our ordinance. It is addressed in many other counties. It ranges anywhere from 6 months to a year is the pretty typical timeframes that we're seeing, that you can't submit the same application within 2 years or within that time period. There is an exception that can be made if there's a substantial change or new evidence. And that's at the discretion, a lot of times, of Board of Adjustment or Planning Commission, that the ordinances are giving those, that if there's been a substantial enough change, they can decide to hear a petition before that year mark is up.
So I've been misunderstanding for 10 years. I thought you guys had that. I thought you had to wait a year before you could reapply.
Well, who brought that up? Because that's what I was told
So
like
I think
10 years
it
ago.
used to be in there, right?
It
It's
was
not there anymore. We can't find it.
It was in the ordinance in 2012 with the ordinance rewrites. I don't know, I don't remember it ever being removed or being under discussion at that time. All I can say is that it's no longer in the ordinance.
Correct.
There you go.
Yep. And I think everybody relies on that, plus the fact that there's the county board rule about not readdressing policy things for a year, and everybody just assumes that, and we tell people there's a 1 year that you can't, and it's not actually in our ordinance that you can't.
So they can
somebody
do
could
laps.
sue your
Yeah.
And we see in the same,
So somebody could sue their pants off.
so just
It might not hurt.
put it out there because there's more other county
Well,
information.
It's caused me more frustration than anything that, you know, somebody wants to do something and then they get denied and they see why they're denied and they're like, okay, well, I'll adjust this, and this. And if they want to come back, I'd prefer that they were able to come back.
But if they make the adjustments, so then at that point, what most counties have done is if it's a substantial change or new evidence, if they've made a substantial enough change to make it sufficient, then they can reapply, but within that time period. It's just you can't,
That's if we had that rule.
if we had that.
We don't even have that rule, so they
No.
already can.
Right now, they don't even have to make any changes. They could basically turn around, make photocopy their previous application, put a new date on it and turn it
But
in.
we haven't ever had that happen, have we?
We've had inquiries about the process for reapplication following denial. They didn't follow through with it right away, but we've had those inquiries about how do I do this and what do I need to do.
I think if there's changes, it's just, enough change in there. I see no reason why not. Like Steve says, somebody comes in and wants to build a house and it's denied for something simple, but enough.
Along those lines, if we do nothing, they're gonna already know that I was denied. I better change something because I'll be denied for the same reason again.
Yeah.
So if we just don't do anything, it seems like.
Plus, they have to refile a fee too, right?
They do.
So that would put some risk in it, I would think, just
Sure.
throwing it back.
If there was no rule and there was a change in who was on these committees, they could probably just reapply
That would probably
without
be good
changing
too.
anything. I mean,
Opposed to
Because
that.
then you got a different, I mean, it could be county board, could be different political makeup and maybe they don't need to, there's an election and we got a different majority and they can come right back and get it done.
And on this one, I did do research into other counties. I made it through the administrative sections of all those ordinances. This one, I believe every other county does have some form of time limit on reapplication. Oh, not Goodhue. Goodhue County doesn't.
This doesn't really seem like a problem.
Goodhue County is the only one of the ones that I listed up that I looked at. Goodhue County is the only one that does not have a state resubmission.
What was the time for most of the counties?
Probably the average is a year. A couple of them one or two of them had it at 6 months. I think one of them had it at 2 years.
Wow,
I'd like to maybe see 6 months.
That's board
That's
turnover
like-
2 year, Jerry.
Give them an airplane ticket out of here, say.
I can't remember. There's
Not gonna wait that long.
No kidding.
Explanation of why they did it. Like they actually codified in their ordinance why they are putting that provision in. I'll read that.
If they know they're denied, I'm sure that, I guess if it was me, I was denied for something, putting up a shed or something, and I'm thinking that pretty much everybody else, they're gonna do the changes so they can get it done. And if they're gonna wait a year or 2 years, they're gonna say the hell with it.
The language in there's in its Fluor County, there's says the imposition of this 12-month period is intended to give the applicant time to reconsider the appropriateness of the proposal, to address concerns, and to encourage dialogue between the applicant and affected neighboring landowners.
I don't think they can figure that out.
So
Why they're
I
losing
guess,
population.
my question would be, doesn't our staff typically go through this advisory process so that they know what's allowed and what's not allowed? And so the only way they would get denied is if they didn't follow the staff's recommendations, right?
No, because
Typically?
there's some that are questionable. They're on the fence. They can go forward if they want to. I mean, we've had conditional use
Okay.
that they get denied, they come through. So
Okay.
variances that get denied.
I feel like the problem solves itself in that if you get denied, you need to change something or you're just gonna get denied again. So go back and make it the way the planning commission would accept it, and why drag it out so that they say, well, that's too long, and they go to Wisconsin? I mean, just.
If there's
let-
a
let it-
change, a substantial change, and they retool it, or they come in and say, how can we retool it?
Yeah.
That isn't applicable.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
doesn't. we
well,
have to
that's
put
the
a date.
second,
It's if it's
that's the
identical.
second part of their,
So in other words, we don't need to change anything because it's where they already have the ability to do
nothing's
it.
in there.
If they make enough changes, or if they make any changes, they're able to come back right away.
Right, so,
That's there right now. That would be there with this. What this would be addressing would be things where it's not a substantial change, or where it.
well, what's your definition of
Well, this-
That
substantial?
would be up to the decision maker to decide, and some counties have it as their zoning administrator or planning director, and some counties have it as either the Board of Adjustment or Planning Commission, depending on the body of the peer, to make the determination of whether it was substantial enough to warrant.
But this group and any other makeup of planning commission that I've sat on in 10 years have always had very meaningful discussion. And the petitioner is sitting right there. And if they can tell that the planning commission is struggling with a certain issue and they come back and they don't really try to resolve that, they're pretty much have the table set that they're going to be denied again, which is not why they're going to want to come here.
Yeah, especially if they got.
And it's not free to make the application.
Jordan?
Well, and I think the one that we have tabled right now is a good enough example as well, where if it does seem like it's going to be denied, we could just table it, and if they intend on changing something, we could just avoid this.
Which one that we have tabled? We have a couple of them tabled.
The Doug Stanton one is the one I'm referring to,
Okay,
but
yeah.
One down at the hot fish shop.
yeah, I mean, if it seems problematic and it seems like they're willing to change or do something different, we can just table it. I don't know. It doesn't seem necessary to me.
We really don't need to change anything or put any dates on something like that. Well,
Well, it's up to you guys. I mean, the problem is that everybody thinks there's this rule out
That's
there,
right.
and we keep referencing this rule. So do
But
we
you-
codify the rule or do we not have the rule?
You don't have the rule.
We currently
You
don't.
gotta start telling people that, Mike.
Well, we only recommend. They still have to go to the town board. So there's a process here. And I just don't think they're gonna slip through the cracks because they reapply and they think we're gonna wear down. Looking around, I don't see too many of us that are wear down, okay?
There's 90 days built into it regardless.
No matter how you do it. Plus they have a fee that they're gonna have to reapply.
Substantial.
And I'm actually glad to hear that there isn't a year wait.
Mhm. It's been a frustration to me many times.
So I personally feel that we don't need to really make any change because the system is working and evolving and gelling.
Patrick.
Could there be something put in there?
Patrick.
Right.
I don't want to see it to be a merry-go-round, make a little change. That's not quite good enough because your time is valuable. You've got bigger things to do. With some guy that just tweaks it a little bit, maybe I can let it fly this time,
And we have to go through all the noticing.
Oh, yeah, all that kind of thing, As far as the, a time length, I don't know about that one, would be good, whatever the rest of them, the other counties have and that type of thing. But I would, defer to staff. What's with everything else that you have on your plate and you're doing, what is a reasonable time for that to come back and, let's hopefully they have their act together and then move on with it. But, just like, every month or something like that. Okay? Oh, I'm sorry. Out of line.
Hey,
So, whatever, if there is a timetable or isn't a timetable, it was only that anecdotally, it was gonna be a year for any variance in the same condition to come forward again. And assumed it was the same for planning commission and county board for CPs and IPs. That isn't really the case. And whether it was in an old version, of the zoning ordinance or not, doesn't seem to be there. So we thought, well, instead of anecdotal, quoting anecdotal items, we better just see what your wishes were here. So
Harley,
So could we put something in there to have, because right now we've got nothing. Is there something we could put in there to say, yeah, you could reapply in 30 days, 60 days, whatever? You know, if you were denied, you know, if you brought the changes that were needed. Some wording like that.
The petition.
Yeah, I think the changes, because if you say a substantial change, what her definition of substantial and my definition are two
Well,
different
that's
things.
just it. It's-
It's up to this committee who, so I would leave that out because that's very subjective. If somebody wants to spend the money and they sat here and listened to everything we talked about,
They should know what the changes.
they
need
should
to be.
know that, hey, if we have to do this, then hopefully it gets
But we could
passed.
put something in there just to have something in there to let people know that they can come to reapply. Because right now there's nothing.
Yeah, there should be some reference about the reapplication process.
They want to fork out the money, hey, we're willing.
The staff can forward the information.
Yeah, I would think that.
Well, I mean, there is an appeal process, right?
Yes, there's also an appeal.
That's
And-
separate from this.
But there,
But-
it's a very different standard. The appeal process, when it comes to appealing the denial of a permit, is going to be based on the record and whether or not that appeal or the process itself were appropriate. And it will have nothing to do with, well, I'm gonna make these changes.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you're just reapplying without making any changes,
Hoping for a different outcome.
yeah, I mean, that should go to the appeal process. If you don't want to make any changes, you've got an appeal process.
But that wouldn't go because the standards and the code enforcement are gonna be different, so it wouldn't.
Okay.
It wouldn't be the same as reapplying and getting to argue.
Yeah, it's a different process. I mean, it's going to a court, but I mean, if you're not going to make any changes and you've been denied,
The point is,
You're not asking them to grant the permit, you're saying that the planning commission of the board of Board of Adjustment didn't do their jobs correctly, which is a different.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Then I think it should be granted, even though you denied it before, I want you to reconsider it, basically.
Okay.
if they come back with an unchanged plan, that should be not very much work for the planning department. You're just gonna put the same, basically process the exact same thing as you processed before. It would be our time at the, at this meeting. But I would have full trust in the planning department that they're gonna advise this applicant. You were denied, you heard the conversation, you know why you were denied. If you make the same application, you're gonna probably see the same outcome. So,
And just to dovetail on that, I'm just, because we're having a discussion, that would kind of depend on when, if they turned around with the same application in 6 months or 8 months, and what if they had added some other structures to the property, or, we're still gonna go out and inspect. Now, if it's the very next month, yeah, absolutely, it'll be just a slam dunk, but we have costs of noticing, there's still gonna be,
shouldn't their application fee cover that much?
oh, yeah.
I mean,
But, it kind of would depend on what else is happening around there, or if any other state laws have changed. I mean, there could be some other factors that we would want to have to make sure that our information as we represent it for the decision makers is accurate. But if it
So
was
do you
the
feel like
next month,
something's so broken that if we didn't do anything?
We're just bringing it as a discussion. It's an option. Almost every other county has it. It's something that we've said we have and we don't. Is this something that should be added or not? That's the question that's up to you guys to discuss.
For when we bring it back up, could we talk to a planning department at a county that doesn't have a rule like this and see if they've had a problem with it?
We could touch base with Kristen.
I think that would be useful for us.
But obviously, if we haven't had it, it's not been much of an issue because
I'm telling you.
Yeah.
tell people you
Yeah,
have
we've
it.
been
Stop telling
we
them.
have
Yeah,
it,
just
and not
stop
recently
telling
that
them.
We realized it's not actually there, even though everybody thought it was.
because it
Keep
used to
telling.
be there and it disappeared.
Yeah.
To me, the goal is to be, customer friendly,
Yes.
and not having it seems like the most customer friendly you can come back and reapply, but, you know, you're gonna need to make some changes. Rather than just tell them, hey, yeah, you have to wait a year and, you know, maybe they go somewhere else and.
So practically speaking, just to jump in for a second, as Eric and Lou have said many a time, and I know that, you know, Lou says the same thing to Olivia, as well, and all of our planners, you know, when you're working with someone at the counter and you come out to their home and you're talking about their dreams and their goals for a property, within the framework of the zoning ordinance and state agencies, we want to get to yes in the framework of what we recommend, if it seems at all possible. And so if no was the answer, and they're back at the counter saying, gosh, what else could I do here? You know, we're diving right in to say, well, you know, if the height of maybe you move it away from the property line a little bit, you're a little close, whatever it is in the circumstance, to try to help them get to yes.
That's
because
appreciated.
the help, you know, I mean,
That's what
it
we
is the help desk, really. So, then if there are changes, no problem, it goes right through the process. It's just like, we were a little bit thrown, like, oh, if they don't make any changes, could they just keep looping?
Wasting your
I think we would become aware just as they would if that became a problem,
Right.
and then maybe we would have to implement something like this, but
So it sounds like the consensus is we don't really need this. That's what I'm hearing. Okay, let's move on.
To take this one off the plate then, or do you want us to come back with more information from other counties?
I would say come back with some more information,
Sorry.
you know, in written form and then with staff. You know, is 6 months, you know, enough, or, you know, a year seems a long time, you know, when they're making changes and that type of thing. But I think not to overburden staff, yet gives the client or the applicant, you know, time to make some changes too. I think there should be some kind of a time frame there.
We should have a consensus. And that's what we would do at the county board, is we would ask.
Okay, anyone that thinks we should just put this on the sidelines and not look at it again, or don't need this one at all, just tell people, you know, not tell them that it's a year wait when it's not
You could reply, we recommend that you make some changes based on the discussion.
that. Raise your hand.
All right.
Okay,
rephrase that.
anyone that rephrase it?
Well, come again, because I was just thinking of some other things there.
Wasn't paying attention. You need to see.
I wasn't paying attention. No, repeat it again if you would, please.
Okay. Legal, please repeat what we just voted on.
What you just said.
Basically, the question is, those in favor of stopping any further discussion on reapplication, not bringing it back to you, because we'll just tell them that they can reapply. We recommend they make the changes that were discussed.
There you go. Raise your hand if you think that's what we should do. Okay. And if you think we should keep doing it, raise your hand. Then I think it's pretty much lopsided, so. Thank you.
Take that off the list. Oh,
Okay,
nice to check.
one less thing. Yeah, well, good discussion.
Yeah.
We needed to have the discussion, especially since we keep telling people that we're not later. All right, so the next one is one that's come up most times when we talk about interim use permits, and whether or not we should have a streamlined renewal or transfer process. So if we are issuing a IUP for a set time period, should we make it go much faster and easier to be able to just extend that time period for the same permit? Or if the contingent on sale of the property, how we go about transferring it from one property owner to the other? So the planning commission's previously said that a streamlined process might be appropriate. So we're here to have a little bit of conversation about that and what, if you wanted to do that, what that would look like. Currently, the way that it would work, if you'll note from the language that we sent out is, I'm trying to remember, I don't have my memo in front of me. But basically it's the same as modification or any other application. You would have to, it's essentially the same thing. The problem that we run into is With a renewal or transfer, we will still be bound by notice, hearing, and decision requirements. So how much can we really streamline the process at that point? It still has to go through noticing the neighbors, coming before the planning commission, going before the county board in order to make those modifications. But if there's ways that we can streamline that and we want to put that into our ordinance, we'd be happy to have that discussion.
Another quick thing from the staff, combined staff standpoint would be, you know, if they were reapplying and it was the same parties, the time period expired, but they wanted to reapply for another interim use permit, waiving fees. Well, we found out,
That's not in our ordinance either.
we've talked about it, and it's happened a couple of times to try to facilitate things. I haven't got carried away with it. I got a pretty skinny budget. I can't waive too many fees, but, you know, would this be kind of an appropriate spot? Because we have talked about that a time or two, saying, you know, we're gonna force them to pay the fee again if they were to renew an IUP. I'm, you know, flexible, and if I'm allowed to waive that fee, and this is the wishes of the planning commission and the board following that, fine and well, but at this point right now, I guess I'm really not able to do that, if that were part of it.
It's not codified in our zoning ordinance that those can be waived by the planning director. So I guess from your perspective, maybe the place to start would be for a renewal or transfer process, what would you think would be reasonable? We want to make it as easy for the petitioners as we can, but still make sure that the purpose of having a renewal or transfer is to extend the timeline for something that's going really well and that we think is appropriate, or to pass it from one property owner to another, ensuring that the next property owner also has a solid understanding of what the expectations are for the permit.
I never was for the expansion of this interim use permit. Because originally when it came up, they were having just an event. One-time event, couple of days.
Family night on the farm.
That's
Boom, they get their,
Don't need a conditional use for that.
so if that's needed again and it's a different location, or even if it's on the same location, I could see applying for it all over again. But now it's expanded to many other applications within our conditional use permits and interim use and all that. So there's a drop dead time that's put on it. And if it's for, say, somebody taking care of their elderly person, and that person lives as long as the Queen of England, and depending on how we wrote it, it might need several extensions. Or maybe it's another member of the same family. I think there should be a smoother transition than them starting all over again.
We would like to have it be a smoother transition than starting all over again, that's for sure. That's what we're trying to do. I can tell you that the interim use permit stuff did not necessarily come out of Family Night on the Farm and the events. It came out of a change in statute that said you can't do the things that you've been doing with CUPs. Those are interim use permits, so you need to find a way to handle this. I know Olivia and I were at training yesterday from MCIT, and I think we're the only county that does. Were we the only ones that raised our hand about how we do interim use permits?
Yeah.
Yeah. So every other county, the way that they did it was what we had originally brought when we first started talking about interim use permits, which is these uses are interim uses. These uses are conditional uses, period. They split them up that way. We're the only county that says you can do that you can do anything as either conditional or interim as long as you find it that way. So it's a little bit unique. It is a way to do it. It's makes us unique in the state, or at least those that were at the MCIT conference yesterday. So it does get a little confusing, but there are things that should be interim uses, and that by statute, because there's a date or event for termination, we can't put the time limits on things like we used to without having the interim use permit as an option. So it's just a matter of how we handle that. We could go back and look at it and find different methods to do it and go through the various uses and revise the statute that way, or the ordinance that way.
No.
But no, we started down that path and it was a very painful discussion, so.
Edgy on that one.
2 years worth.
A question, you say we're still bound by notice, hearing, and decision requirements. Are you saying we are because of the way it's written, or we are bound by those no matter what we do?
Because because of the way both statute and ordinance are written, if we are making changes to an interim use permit, we have to treat it in a certain way, which means we have to let the neighbors know that they want to make these changes. If, you can be granted a 5-year interim use permit. If you want to make it a 10-year, your neighbors have a notice. We have the right or the obligation to notify the neighbors of that request. And then we have to hold the public hearing, and there has to be the formal decision within the 60 days.
Okay, so we have to do those no matter what. Okay,
Whether we handle it as either a modification or amendment to the interim use permit, which is handled, according to our ordinance, it's handled exactly the same way as a new application.
Okay.
Same process. The question is whether we want to find ways to streamline it for purposes of renewing or transferring the seat.
well, so an example, I'm just trying to understand how we might streamline it, okay?
That's what
So,
we were trying to understand too, because we've been talking about finding a process.
Yeah.
And then we realized we're not sure where we could make those. And so we wanted to have the discussion with you about where you would like to see us try to streamline.
well, I guess it would, in my mind, streamline the process if they didn't have to go through a new application process. We could just look at the old application and say, we want to change this. And then go through whatever things we are obligated to go through with just,
Right, very simple, straightforward
yeah.
process, as opposed to the whole packet of material. One page. I want to renew it for an extra 5 years because my business is going really well.
That's what I'm thinking.
Well, some of the changes, you'd almost have to have some of the planning people, depending on what the changes.
Oh, they have to
And
look at
that's
it.
the thing is that then we still have staff time. There would still probably be some level of staff report, whether it's a 1-page memo or a full version report or, a lot of the things would have to kind of stay the same, which is why we're not sure we're able to do a renewal transfer process unless we go to otherwise we never change.
Which is a new application, basically.
Which, it's an application. for an application.
Okay, but it's the same process.
Yep.
Okay.
Same fee.
Yep.
How about charge half the fee or a percentage of the normal fee for extensions and renewals?
If it's streamlined, I mean, we want to pay for staff, we want to cover our
They have to
costs.
notice, if they have to notice all the neighbors,
Right.
notice in the papers and have a hearing here, your costs are gonna be,
Same.
Do the actual fees cover actual costs?
No.
But, one example could be, I was trying to rack my brain to follow up on what Kelly said was, okay, let's just say that you permitted a welding shop and it was an interim use permit for 5 years because you wanted to see how it was going with the neighbors, because there was quite a few neighbors here, say. And then you were gonna have them come back in 5 years if all is well, same parameters, same welding shop, no footprint change, nothing. Want another interim use permit for another 5 or 10 or some other amount of time. Would that be an example of one? 'Cause it was
question I
kind of a
have is,
use that
have we
was
ever
really-
done that? Have we ever put a 5-year event on something or a 3-year
I don't
event?
recall.
What, did we do it during the,
It was a business, I'm trying to remember which one. It was within the
We
last,
do that on some solar applications. They
we
got-
have not done solar as IUPs. That's
Solar's
that's
always
been
too-
something we
too
brought
many
initially.
years?
And we dropped that.
And other counties do them as IUPs or CUPs, probably slightly more that do IUPs.
Yeah,
'cause I did a
some
bunch of
counties made them
counties.
very specifically IUPs only. I think the ones that came up yesterday were solar and gravel pits were the big ones that everybody was talking about as an IUP strictly.
So solar again could be an example if it were an IUP and they wanted to go another 20 years. There's a lot of parameters that could have changed that amount of time. That might be too long of a time horizon to want to do any kind of foreshortened process.
I think, part of the reason our county has them be either IUP or CUP rather than specific lists is because IUPs are somewhat a new concept. And we've run into situations, one I'm thinking of in particular was a car lot on Highway 61 down near La Crescent. He came in, he adamantly knew that he only wanted a CUP because he was building a business that he wanted to be able to resell. And we would only give him an IUP And he says, well, I don't want it. I don't want it. I'm not interested in IUP. And he didn't want to pay for it. But we gave him what the board said he was allowed to have. And so I think, we've just had enough experience. And the idea was we were going to have more tools in the toolbox, so to speak. And I think there was a cement plant that came in that they felt like they would be more likely to get buy-in from the neighbors if they were going to have a 5-year plant, show that they ran a good facility, and then, maybe it would go longer than that. So they were willing to use the IUP to gain favor with the neighborhood rather than, if you approve this, it's forever. So, I mean, I think it's with good reason that we have more than just these are this and these are this.
It does give us more flexibility than a lot of companies have. It sometimes makes our jobs a lot more difficult, I think, but it gives us the flexibility to tailor things to the specific situation.
Or changing times, not to bring up dog kennels and dog breeders, but, that were permitted as DUPs before, and now, just because of a lot of issues have come up, they've been processed as IUPs. So, if somebody sells it, maybe the next owner doesn't automatically have another dog kennel. There's density of dog kennels all over the place. I mean, so over time, recommendations from the planning commission and county board may have changed that status of, hey, staff, maybe you want to consider evaluating this.
And one thing that popped into my head yesterday during our training is a lot of it depends on how our timelines are written. It might be worth exploring whether or not we can write, because I think the presenter was talking about how if you say this is going to be reviewed in X years, if you don't have the options that can happen at that point available or written into your language, you can review it all you want to, unless they're actually in violation, you can't make any changes. So we could potentially look at reframing how we put those things in there and say, this will be reviewed in 5 years. And if it meets X, Y, and Z, we'll renew it for 5 years and put that into it so that everybody's on notice of what it would be. And maybe we could bypass.
And then you could waive the fees and you could put that in
We
there.
may not even need to have a full application at that point. So I can look into that. As we were talking, it kind of was starting to formulate how that might work.
That's a good idea.
Lynn?
If I get to waive the fees.
Actually, Stephanie, I was just thinking, you want to streamline it, but we don't want to have to pay the costs. But if this idea works with having it written into the permit that it's reviewed in 5 years and
Probably
possibly.
some of this is starting to come up because it's pushing 5 years since we started doing that.
Right.
IUP.
So how do we keep track of, like, say, somebody had a 5-year permit? That's,
He's got a fancy new system that's gonna have the ticklers.
Woo-hoo.
Got a mini
I'm still
dollar.
working on it, and
$5
Olivia is, pushing from behind so that, because she's so conversant with the system, and Lou as well. But I was clicking on reports, on SSTS and sorting them by date they came in or whether historical permits and then I switched to the map view so I could see in the last 60 days which ones were where. So suddenly that tool is going to be a lot easier to answer questions for all of you too. So.
Is that tool called SSTS? Is
So
that?
that's septic. That just happens to be one thing I looked
Okay.
up. But
Yes,
we call
yeah.
it Citizen Services OpenGov, but it's the new permitting package that apply online, pay online, but it also helps us sort things. And then say Olivia's going out on inspections, she can see if anybody else had a project over that way. That was one of our goals and objectives. I'm just digressing a little bit here because I'm kind of excited about it. She could pick up a couple other people's inspections and inspect them while she's in the southwest or southeast corner of the county for a little more efficiency of windshield time. So yeah, the payback will be a while, but we're trying to do that kind of thing. And then tracking that, to get back to your question, tracking that 5 years is going to be a lot easier.
And along the same lines too, it would expire at 5 years unless they were back here. So some of the burden too would be on the landowner to say, hey, my permit's gonna expire. I'd like to, we need to make sure this gets renewed.
some of them are like, hey, why should I pay the money? It's working.
Right. And it wouldn't be, because it wouldn't, if this is all it took, if it was just put it in there, it's not a new application, so we don't have to go through an application process. We don't have to have a fee for it. So it would basically be just you come back in review the status of it. If everything's going well, they meet whatever criteria we set for a renewal in the IUP itself, then it would be renewed at that point.
I do remember Jason Gilman quite often. He would just assert that he has the authority to waive fees, and he would. He said, as a planning director, I can waive the fee.
Yeah, I've asserted that a few times too. I just wasn't
We just
too
don't
sure
know
I could find
If
it.
or where that's codified, but yes.
I think in this case though, having a renewal fee, and I'm gonna call it a renewal because they're not asking for a lot of changes and this and that. That it would put clarity for whoever that person is, because right now, if you have one of these and it's gonna expire in 3 months, how soon I gotta get this process going? 6 months, 3 months?
Yeah. Mm.
It would have to
And,
be
oh,
60 days prior to.
yeah, now I'm under the crunch. What do I do here? I'm not gonna have it done. Do I have to close for whatever time?
Yeah.
You know, and I go back to that welding shop or whatever you're talking
But if you
about.
forgot all about it and like you're a busy person and everything else, and it's like,
Well, Kay's got that file
understand
thing.
that Kay, but then Kay is gonna come up to your door and go,
But hopefully
but
just
you
like,
usually get a notice of that. You
Right.
get a letter in the mail going, oh, okay, okay.
and hopefully that letter would go out with the timeliness of it so that all procedures can be done and you're not caught in a hardship. But to me, a renewal versus a fresh scratch application are two different things.
Yeah.
And two different fees would be appropriate. I don't know what that would be, but,
Mhm.
So the fee schedule can be adjusted on an annual basis, and then the county board approves it if they concur with recommendations made. So that's kind of a moving target that, you know, if the number's half, if it's 2/3, if it's zero, whatever it is, we can put it in there.
If we're
and I'm
talking,
not worried about the renewal fee. I'm worried only about the timeline and getting this done in a fair, just way.
yeah, so we can,
Inefficient.
if we're looking at
Yes.
being able to put
Fair
something into
vision.
an IUP, I come back with some proposed ideas about how that might work.
Perfect.
I need to work through a few things and check with CIT on what I'm making. But
And my thought is the person that has it, I just don't want them caught in limbo and frustrated and, oh my God, the sky's falling in.
No, it would be like 6 months before your permit's supposed to expire, they send out a letter saying, hey, your time's almost up, here's your timeline. I would propose that it would have to be within this, it needs to be, they need to request the renewal more than 60 days prior to the expiration, just because then we have the 60-day rule then at that point that would kick in. That gives us enough time, we know, to get before this body, the county board, et cetera.
And it'd be a good time to say, are you going to make any changes or these types of things and
Are there any
engage?
changes, then you need to
Right.
be doing
And
an
then
amended.
It's not, all. Yeah, it's not a renewal, but an amended one.
Correct.
I think that could be easily put together
Okay. I will-
personally.
I'll take a crack at that and we'll come
What happened to our half-hour meeting tonight?
Right.
Not quite.
Sorry.
It's your fault. You're the chair.
back. We've had we're just trying to move forward or get off our plates. So the last topic for discussion is on relinquishments. We talked about this one before. So where a property owner no longer wishes to have a CUP variance attached to the property, can they have that removed? So how, had a lot of discussion, planning, we had a meeting where we talked about that as a concept. I discussed this with one of the presenters at yesterday's training. He said that property owners absolutely have the right to have this taken off their property. The correct process for it is mostly what we've been doing. He did have an additional suggestion of having that also, that the county board sees that and says, yes, we're declaring this null and void before it's officially recorded. So we'll probably start doing that, have a process. The question for you all is whether or not we should codify that in our ordinance and actually put that in there. There's two different perspectives on that. One is there's a process, we know it can be done. Do we need the language? And the other is this is a very rare thing generally. We just happen to have had a couple of them show up very recently. So is it something where if I'm no longer here, if Kay is no longer here, who remembers how to do it? Are we gonna have to research what the rules are and how this works every time? Or would it make more sense to just have 2 sentences that say,
You just asked Eric Johnson.
he's not even here right
He's
now.
not here right now.
So-
I hear you there.
Till
He's
December.
not here permanently either. Nobody's here permanently. So what happens at that point? Do we have it in writing?
Are you sure?
Where everybody knows?
Eric's here permanently.
He might be. Let's
Okay,
see how possible.
And also, you know how we have internal discussions, department to department, and we can find a lot of other counties, we haven't dug really deeply of, that have this.
I can't find any that do.
Yeah, so before we, you know, like leap too far ahead, I want to make sure that we, you know, kind of think through the ramifications of this. You know, when somebody was really vehement about getting rid of it, like getting it recorded on the deed, it seemed pretty straightforward, but then there's also, well, should it stay on that property in case the next owner wishes for that right? If it's a CUP, say. You know, so it was kind of giving us a little bit of pause there. So I just wanted to say, you know, we were kind of going back and forth.
Which is why I got brought up at yesterday's training.
Yeah, with planning and legal. And so Stephanie took the opportunity to get a little more input from one of the presenters. And so, you know, there's different points of view, like, you know, like many things, about how this could play
I
out.
can tell you that most other counties, well, actually, I couldn't find any other counties that actually have a relinquishment process itself written into their ordinance. What most other counties do have that we don't is expiration of conditional use permits, variances, other permits, where if they're not used after a certain amount of time, then they automatically expire and we take care of that. We don't have that either. So if you can grant something, it can never be used for 25, 30 years, and then, but it's still on the property, and so it's still a valid permit.
what? Harley,
What? I guess my thought is, you know, if I've got a conditional use permit and I'm leaving the property or whatever, somebody else is coming on there, are they gonna treat that CUP, you know, my name's on it, really?
They run with the land.
Okay.
property, it's,
Okay. I guess I'd just as soon have somebody else apply for a CUP so they understand what they have to do. You know, how they're supposed to take care of it.
Relinquishment process, and you can say, I'm gonna relinquish my CUP, and then we would go through the process. It's just, do we want to have language in our ordinance that says, you know, this is, if you want to relinquish your CUP, you can do so, fill out the written request. It will then go to the county board to be declared null and void and recorded on the property.
Because a new permit might be different, you know, than the other one. There might have been some changes over the years, you know, rules, laws, and
the question I have is what is the harm of doing that? I mean, if it's something that should be there so you can look at it, like you say, 2 sentences and okay, here's the rules. What is the harm of doing that?
There isn't, it's just a preference. I know, we also get told, you know, I've heard from people that our zoning ordinance is very long. So we want to add 2 more sentences to it and just make more rules when it's something you can already do, or do we want to make sure that it's clear what you can and can't do, or what you can do and how?
I'm a little surprised to hear that. Did you say it could have an expiration or it does? I mean, my
It's not used.
interpretation was it was a privilege, you applied for it, now you've got it, and you're probably going to want to always hold on to that privilege to drive the value of your property up, and so the next person could run the business or run the gas station or
And
run.
that's the difference between a CUP and an IUP, is whether or not they have that. What we're talking about is things like language that says, like one of these examples here. So this is out of Rice County, just because first one I looked at here. A conditional use permit shall expire and be considered null and void 1 year after the county board of commissioners' final decision to grant the conditional use permit if no construction has begun. For the purposes of this section, construction shall include installation of footings, slab, foundation, posts, walls, or other portions of a building. Land clearing or the installation of utilities shall not constitute construction. So basically, if we give you this, you actually we want you to use it. So if you're just gonna get it just to get it and just sit on it, then it would expire for non-use. And that actually is something that it's not like what happens with an interim use permit. It's just if you're not using it, then you don't get to keep it.
How would we know if they're using it or not? They already got the permit.
Close complaints. Just finding out because we happen to be there.
Yeah. Okay.
I know, but you know, she's talked 30 times already. Okay, one more. Okay,
I just was gonna see if this was an example, like if somebody comes in that's a solar developer and gets CUPs for a whole pile of sites in anticipation of a line expansion, which then aces out everybody else and then just sits on them for the next decade.
Right.
I mean, would that be?
There are some things that we have talked about having a density overlay for. Solar is one, I think dog kennels are one, things like that. If we end up with a density overlay, then that's a possibility, or people get the permits and just to prevent others from potentially getting them later.
That makes
we
sense.
already have on the books that on them solar farms, after they're built, isn't it like 12 months? If they're not used within 12 months, they're supposed to be torn down? Right?
After their life.
Well, what's their life? Because that one on 248 has not been turned down yet.
But that's a condition within their conditional use permit, is that they have to be, what's it?
The one right on 248, the brand new one. Yeah.
That's nothing to do with
That's
I don't know what you're waiting
condition,
for there.
that's not anything that is in our ordinance that declares it null and void. The CUP is still there. If they stop using it, they have to decommission it. They could turn around and build another one if they wanted to. Because the CUP is still.
But they build them, but they don't use them. Why do they do that?
I don't know, but what we could do with language along lines of expiration is we can address that issue. If you're gonna build a solar garden, you should actually be generating solar power and not monopolizing the ability to do solar and not doing
Well, it gets down to monitoring again, density and the use of the county.
If we have density, especially if we get to the point of density overlays, that's where I can foresee having the expiration be more of an issue. Because then you can potentially prevent others from doing things with their land just by being a jerk. The bigger question is the relinquishment. That's the one that we're talking about here, so.
To me, relinquishment seems like it would be a very rare instance, and it will become more rare with the introduction of the IUP because a lot of those have built-in end dates already.
We actually had somebody relinquish an IUP. So we've had two in the last year asked about relinquishment. One of them was not IUP. One was a CUP.
But it would have expired anyhow eventually.
Yeah, the IUP would have expired anyway, and the CUP, the reason why they wanted to relinquish it is they were splitting the parcel, and it was gonna create problems, how do you deal with a CUP when you split a parcel? Does it go with one or the other, or does it end up on both?
It sounds like you already have the authority. If somebody comes in and they say, I want to relinquish my CUP because I don't want anyone to ever have this dairy in this location ever again.
If it's
Sounds
already
like-
there is whether we codify the process for it.
So I found it, and it's gone on the deed, it's gone to the recorder's office, but, you know.
It seems like very rare. I can't imagine anything where if I had, that privilege on my property, that it doesn't do me any harm having the privilege. Or it would only drive my value of my property up.
Well, it depends. If you had a feedlot and you no longer wanted animals around and you wanted your son to build a house right across the road from you, then you could relinquish your feedlot so he could build a house, or else he has to stay
So there would be
1,000 feet away
Right.
from the feedlot. I mean, that's one I can think of and of getting rid of, Carly raised her hand.
So a CUP is different than a registered feedlot. You can still close your feedlot and have a CUP,
Oh,
but you still need to go through the feedlot permitting process to start up again.
Well, a junkyard, I mean, what do
Okay.
we call, that's another example. Doesn't necessarily increase the property value.
Back to whether or not we want to codify, I'm wondering how it assists the county staff. Kay mentioned something about how a property owner can say, yes, I'd like to relinquish this. But then you said something about if it goes to a board, it gets recorded a little differently versus just changing.
Nope, it's the same thing. It basically, it just means that the county board would have to look at the petitioner's request to get rid of this and say, yep, we're declaring this null and void, and then that gets recorded. What we've been doing so far is they make the written request and it's been getting recorded, and which makes it null and void. It would just add that little piece of the county, it would be a consent agenda item.
And
That's pretty much irrelevant to,
Right.
to
Yeah, the question is whether or not we want it in writing, how it works, so that when it comes up again in 5 years, the county attorney's office is trying to figure out what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to do it. Planning staff's not going, we got this request, what do we do with it again? We actually would have it in writing. That's
Yeah, I
the
think-
argument for it. The argument against it is, do you really need it? If there's already a process.
Well, I think you can argue both sides, so we just let you argue.
And we were.
Yeah, that's why we're talking to you.
You know,
What does Minnesota statute law say about closing in the ICP, CUPs and the IUPs? Is it codified in the law, in the statute about?
It just says you have to record it if you're making changes.
It's adequate. They
Yeah, I
want to do
think
it.
so. Right.
It's adequate. If they said it be recorded, they want it recorded, they want it null and voided, it's done.
The authority is there.
The state statute
Yeah, it's
takes
not about
care
the
of it.
authority, it's the process.
okay, so, did the MCIT, did I hear you say the MCIT recommended that the county approve it?
Yes, that the board acknowledge it and declare it null and void.
Okay, so that would be missing if we don't have it in the ordinance.
No, we would start doing that anyway.
Oh,
if we
gotcha,
did- yeah,
okay.
We're not talking about, it's just, do we codify the process so that everybody's on notice of what it is and everybody understands it? Or do we just do it and next time it comes up, we have to figure out how that works again? 'Cause it's been a while.
Okay, so my feeling is if it's a simple one sentence sort of thing, it's good to have it codified, just so everybody that comes on later on understands it.
yes,
I just think that's good, but
the process.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt anything.
it doesn't, if it doesn't, have pages and pages of how,
Maybe we can take 2 sentences out somewhere else.
I volunteer to find a couple.
But that's a whole new story. You have to figure out which two to
Board
take
has
out.
the
Here we
authority
go. We
to
want to hear them
put it
next.
up.
Yes.
That's all that.
I have to figure out whether we can bring it to you. I know that at CIT's training yesterday, they were talking about the 5 variance criteria. And we have 8 because we broke one up in really complicated ways and most of the time people deal with it. So that will be coming back at some point, but we're holding off on that one for right now, so. Any other questions, comment, discussion? Otherwise, we'll bring a little bit of language back on that one.
You're done?
Unless you got others you want to talk about.
Nope.
we're done. My name's on
We're
the
done,
note.
yes.
So you don't want action on it now, Stephanie?
Nope, this was
Okay.
just about discussion.
Okay,
feedback.
okay.
I think we've got a good
Take a motion.
place. We'll come back with some more stuff probably at the October meeting. Maybe at November if we've got more, and then we'll take a break for a little while until February. 'Cause,
You're taking a break? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, I'm
I
taking.
wonder if
Oh.
some pop
these
up.
11 weeks off. I'm coming back just in time to do our 4-hour land use training.
Alrighty.
In February. So I'm not pawning that off on anybody else. I'll be back for that. And the Board of Adjustment Planning Commission.
Biggest change that I noticed is you're not wearing high heels anymore. That's the only thing I
Every once
noticed.
in a while, today was a really long day. So. And starting to get some fun back issues.
Alrighty.
All right.
Thank you.
Yes.
Jordan, you're up. Board of Adjustment. What happened today?
We once again voted on 2 variances for septic systems in the city of Dakota. I had a question of whether or not there's something we could do as a planning commission to put this responsibility on the city of Dakota rather than the county having to keep dealing with it, but I don't have an answer to that. So if you guys had any ideas, I don't know, it seems like as a county, we invested a bunch of time and money into trying to get them all into a sewage treatment system. They shot it down, and yet we're still stuck with all the time and money to fix their problems.
Don't a lot of the other cities in the area take care of that problem?
I mean, a lot of the other cities have a treatment plant.
Well, that's, yeah.
Well, we approved the treatment plant for them.
I know.
But they-
And
that's as far as it went.
yeah, it's just frustrating that it's still our problem and we're still, I mean, I don't know how much the fee is for a septic fee, but we're sending out letters, we're having meetings, we're doing these variances, and I feel like it shouldn't be our problem.
Maybe if
It
we
should be
give
the
it to the
county's
city of
problem.
Dakota, they get moving on their treatment system.
Yeah.
So you approve both of them then? There's two of them?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, how are you gonna turn them down, right? Tell them
exactly.
they gotta
So-
move out of their house?
I complained a little bit, but yeah, I don't know. I feel bad for the property owners because it's not necessarily their fault. But I just don't know what else to do about it.
All righty. Thanks for the update.
I have a
Steve.
question. I'm
Oh.
sorry.
No,
Just-
one more yet. We'll listen to Steve first, then we'll do questions.
Okay. It's pertinent to what he was talking about, but whatever. Whatever you want. If you want to go to Steve, please go
Steve.
ahead.
Yeah, the county board approved the Waukesha permit for building on less than 40 acres.
Okay, that was. All right, Kelly.
So, I guess my question is, I remember on your issue, if it's not exactly analogous, but if like, for example, a county feedlot officer and wasn't doing their job, the MPCA takes over, right? In this case, we gave the city an option, which they turned down, which is causing all sorts of problems. Can't we just push them somewhere else, like to the MPCA? And just say, we're not gonna deal with your septic anymore?
Yeah, so the feedlot program and SSTS program is different.
Sure.
So feedlot program, MPCA does have a program where they inspect and they essentially administer that program regionally. SSTS does not have staff.
Oh.
MPCA, it's the county.
Okay,
Yeah,
Thank
there's
you.
No one to give it back.
just an idea. Yeah,
While you're here, what would happen if we were to deny one of those variances?
Well, I suppose it would depend on the variance. I mean, like the one today, they would have another option, right? Their option would be to put in a holding tank as opposed to the drain field that we were allowing them to have. That said, our ordinance does, I think Kay read off a printed section today at the hearing that talked about county not encouraging holding tanks. So we want them to have soil treatments. Holding tanks just create too much of a burden on the property owner. Sometimes they don't live up to. Yeah, and then you have in the rest of public health exclusions, public ground, which is the worst case scenario.
So what if we were to deny a variance for a holding tank?
Yeah.
The home is no longer livable?
In that case, I think at that point, we're throwing it into Stephanie's realm because we would be seeing lawsuits, because we would be effectively making that home unlivable.
We could be looking at condemnation type issues of that, where we're basically, if it's not livable, we're saying it's not livable at all and you're condemning it, and that could potentially mean we're liable for damages and.
So it could cost us yet more money.
Well, you're taking the value away, because if it's a $80,000 house and now it's worth zero, I mean, you're taking value without.
There are a number of properties in Dakota, not many, maybe less than a half dozen, that I am just waiting for them to come up because I don't know what they're gonna do. I don't know that they have room for a holding tank. Well, I know that they don't, so they're gonna have to be looking at talking to their neighbors, trying to find somewhere to put this stuff. And we'll just have to see how that plays out. But we might be in the situation of trying to deal with some of these properties and not being able to approve what they have and not being able to approve any solution for them that I can figure out at this
Yeah,
point.
they seem to be getting tighter and tighter solution wise, because I think all the easy ones were done early. And now we're starting to see the ones that are more questionable with, you know, zero setbacks, and things like that.
And from a liability standpoint, the other thing to be worrying about is, say we have that denial, is while we're fighting it out in the courts, or it's not, you know, it's valueless or whatever, we have knowledge of an imminent threat to public health that it's draining into, you know. So that
Makes
can
it a whole different
expose the county too. So
Wow.
there's some factors there for sure that are kind of nerve wracking.
Is it, I mean, does it help us to have the record of us approving a treatment facility for them and them shooting it down? I mean, is that?
It wasn't the property owner that shot it down.
Yeah, it's the city.
Right.
Blaming that property owner for,
Township.
So
It's
the
a really
funding find
crappy
out that we
situation.
gave billions of dollars and that's.
Literally.
That's all.
Bummer.
Or sewage, depending.
I'll be quiet.
Thanks for sharing. all
Any other discussion that needs to be brought forth at this meeting before?
Move to adjourn.
Oh,
Second.
okay. Kelly made the motion and Lynn seconded. All that want to leave, say aye.
Aye.
thanks, Steve.
We are adjourned. Thank you. See you.